What would you do if you discovered your own parents had secretly put you on the hook for a $500,000 mortgage and then sued you when you refused to pay? This is the story of how my family's greed destroyed everything and how I fought back in court to save my life. I opened the mail expecting bills. Instead, I found a $520,000 mortgage I supposedly signed for a house I'd never even heard of. My name's Natalie Harper. I'm 34, a structural engineer living in Seattle. I've worked my entire adult life building my financial independence. So how the hell did I end up legally tied to a house my brother lives in? A house I never bought? What happens when your own parents commit mortgage fraud in your name and then sue you when you try to stop it? This story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you become the biggest threat to everything you've built. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why I had to make the hardest decision of my life. But first, let me take you back to that Tuesday morning when my world completely fell apart. I was running late for work, grabbing my coffee, and shuffling through the stack of mail I'd been ignoring for 3 days. You know how it is when you're busy, the mail just piles up on the kitchen counter until you finally have a free moment to deal with it. Electric bill, credit card statement, some random flyer about carpet cleaning. Normal stuff. The kind of mail that makes you wonder why we still get so much paper when everything's digital now. Then I saw a thick envelope from Wells Fargo Mortgage Services. The kind of envelope that's too heavy to be junk mail but too official looking to ignore. My stomach dropped immediately. I don't have a mortgage. I rent a small one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, been there for 6 years. My landlord handles all the property stuff. So why was I getting mortgage paperwork? I set down my coffee mug and stared at that envelope for a long moment. Like if I looked at it hard enough, it might disappear or transform into something harmless. But it just sat there, thick and white, and completely wrong for my life. I tore it open right there in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, still holding my keys. The first page made my hands shake so bad I almost dropped the entire packet. It was a payment schedule, a detailed official payment schedule for a $520,000 mortgage, with my name printed clearly at the top. My social security number listed right there in black and white, and what looked exactly like my signature at the bottom of multiple pages. But here's the thing that really got me: the property address was 1247 Elm Street, Bellevue, Washington. I knew that address. I'd been there exactly once about 3 months earlier for what my parents had called a family dinner. I remember that dinner clearly now, though at the time it seemed perfectly normal. Well, as normal as family dinners ever are in my family. My mom had called and said Lucas, my younger brother, was house-sitting for a friend and wanted to cook for all of us. Which seemed weird because Lucas had never cooked anything more complicated than ramen noodles. But I figured maybe he was finally growing up. The house was nice. Really nice. Too nice for any friend Lucas would have. It was a 3-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage and a landscaped front yard. The kind of place that screams stable mortgage payments and homeowner's insurance. I remember asking Lucas whose house it was, and he'd been vague about it. Said it belonged to a friend from work, though I couldn't remember Lucas ever mentioning any friends from work. Actually, I couldn't remember Lucas mentioning work at all in recent months. But I didn't push it. Family dinners were rare enough that I didn't want to ruin the evening by asking too many questions. Now, standing in my kitchen 3 months later, holding mortgage papers with that exact address, I felt like an idiot for not seeing what was happening. I flipped through the pages with growing horror. Principal balance, $520,000. Monthly payment, $3,247. First payment due in 2 weeks. Late fees clearly outlined. My credit score listed as the basis for the interest rate. This wasn't some mistake. This wasn't a case of mixed-up mail or administrative error. Someone had used my name, my credit, my entire financial identity to secure over $500,000 in debt. That's when I realized this wasn't identity theft by some random criminal. This was something much worse, much more personal. This was my own family destroying my life, one forged signature at a time. I sat down hard on one of my kitchen chairs and spread all the papers out on the table. Purchase agreement, loan application, credit authorization, income verification forms, property inspection reports, title documents. Every single piece of paper had my name on it. Every form showed my personal information, and scattered throughout the stack were signatures that looked exactly like mine, even though I'd never seen these documents before in my life. The worst part was how thorough it all was. This wasn't some sloppy last-minute scheme. Someone had taken the time to forge dozens of documents to answer questions about my employment history, to provide bank statements and tax returns. Someone who knew me well enough to pull this off. Someone who knew where I worked, how much I made, what my social security number was, and exactly how to replicate my signature. Someone in my family. The phone rang while I was still staring at the papers, and I jumped like I'd been electrocuted. The caller ID showed my mom's number, and suddenly I felt like I might throw up. I let it go to voicemail. Then I called in sick to work because there was no way I could focus on structural engineering calculations when my entire financial future had just been hijacked. I spent the rest of that day on the phone with Wells Fargo trying to explain that I'd never applied for this mortgage, never signed these papers, never even seen this property before that one dinner. But banks don't just take your word for it when you claim fraud. They have procedures, investigations, paperwork. The customer service representative was polite but skeptical, like she'd heard this story before from people trying to get out of legitimate debts. "Ma'am, I show here that you provided extensive documentation for this loan. Employment verification, bank statements, tax returns. Are you saying you didn't provide any of this information?" "I'm saying I've never seen any of these documents before today." "And the property inspection? It shows here that you were present for the inspection." I wasn't. I'd never been to that house except for one family dinner. "But how do you prove a negative? How do you prove you weren't somewhere when the paperwork says you were?" By the time I hung up the phone, I felt completely helpless. The bank was treating me like either a liar or someone suffering from amnesia. They had a file full of documents with my name and signature on them, and from their perspective, everything looked legitimate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that dinner at Lucas's friend's house. Thinking about how my parents had insisted on giving me a tour of the place. How they'd pointed out the nice kitchen, the spacious bedrooms, the 2-car garage. How they'd asked me what I thought about the neighborhood, about the house prices in Bellevue, about whether I thought it would be a good investment. At the time, I'd thought they were just making conversation. Now I realized they'd been gathering intelligence for their fraud scheme. I thought about all the times over the past few years when my parents had asked me about my job, my salary, my credit score, questions that seemed like normal parental interest in my success, but now felt like reconnaissance missions. I thought about how they'd always made it clear that I was the responsible one, the one with the good job and the stable income. The one who could handle adult responsibilities, while Lucas needed constant support and protection. And I realized that in their minds, this probably didn't even feel like theft. It probably felt like finally making me live up to my family obligations. Like finally forcing me to contribute to Lucas's well-being in a meaningful way. The next morning, I called Wells Fargo again and demanded to speak to someone in their fraud department. I was transferred 3 times before I reached someone who seemed to take my situation seriously. "Ms. Harper, I understand your concern, but I need you to understand the seriousness of what you're claiming. Mortgage fraud is a federal crime. If you're saying that someone forged your signature on these documents, we'll need to involve law enforcement." "Then involve law enforcement," I said, "because I never signed these papers and I want this mortgage removed from my name immediately." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I have to ask, do you have any family members who might have access to your personal information? Social security number, employment details, that kind of thing." And that's when I knew for certain that my suspicions were right. "Yes," I said quietly. "I do. To understand how my parents could do something this extreme, you need to know how our family worked." Or rather, how it didn't work. I grew up in suburban Washington, in a quiet neighborhood outside Spokane, where everyone knew everyone else's business and family dysfunction was hidden behind perfectly manicured lawns and annual block parties. My parents, Karen and David Harper, always made it clear Lucas, my younger brother by 5 years, was the favorite. And I don't mean subtle favoritism that you might miss if you weren't paying attention. I mean, it was so obvious that even our neighbors noticed and sometimes made uncomfortable jokes about it. Mrs. Peterson next door once asked my mom why she always bragged about Lucas but never mentioned my achievements. My mom's response was that I didn't need the validation because I was naturally self-sufficient. Let me paint you a picture of how different our childhoods were. When Lucas turned 17, my parents surprised him with a brand new red Mustang convertible. I'm talking fresh off the lot, still had the dealer tags, leather interior, the works. They presented it to him in the driveway with a big red bow on the hood while the whole neighborhood watched. For my 16th birthday the year before, they gave me a beat-up mountain bike they'd found at a garage sale. The chain kept falling off, the brakes squeaked, and one of the gears didn't work. When I asked if we could get it fixed, my dad said it would be good for me to learn how to maintain my own transportation. The difference wasn't just in the gifts. It was in everything. While I worked 25 hours a week at a local diner through high school, saving every penny for college and coming home smelling like French fries and exhaustion, Lucas spent his afternoons playing Call of Duty and getting a $40 weekly allowance for doing absolutely nothing. Not even chores. Mom said his job was to focus on his education. Meanwhile, I was expected to maintain a 4.0 GPA while working enough hours to pay for my own car insurance, clothes, and anything beyond basic necessities. When I asked why Lucas didn't have to work, Mom said different children have different strengths and Lucas needed more time to develop his. But here's where it gets really frustrating. When report cards came out, my straight A's were met with, "Well, that's what we expect from you, Natalie. You've always been naturally academic." Meanwhile, Lucas would bring home a report card with 3 C's and a D+, and my parents would take him out for ice cream to celebrate his improvement and talk about how proud they were that he was trying his best. I remember one particular night when I came home from my shift at the diner with news that I'd been accepted to Washington State University with a partial academic scholarship. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. This was my ticket out, my chance to build something bigger than our small town had to offer. My parents' reaction: "That's nice, honey. Did you remember to pick up milk on your way home?" That same week, Lucas got a C+ on a history test, and they called our grandparents to share the good news. It was never open abuse. It was more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every achievement I made was expected, treated like the bare minimum. Every C Lucas got was celebrated like a Nobel Prize. The message was clear: I was supposed to succeed, so my success didn't matter. Lucas was supposed to struggle, so any small victory was a miracle worth celebrating. College was the real kicker, though. I put myself through Washington State University with academic scholarships, student loans, work-study programs, and weekend jobs. I lived in the cheapest dorm at ramen and peanut butter sandwiches more often than actual meals, and wore the same 3 outfits to class for 4 years, because I couldn't afford more. I studied structural engineering, because I was good at math and science, and because I knew it would lead to a stable career with decent pay. Nothing glamorous, but something that would give me financial independence and the ability to never have to depend on anyone else again. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in structural engineering and about $38,000 in student loan debt that I knew I'd be paying off for the next decade. Lucas. My parents paid his full tuition at Western Washington University. They bought him a meal plan, paid for his dorm room, gave him spending money for books and entertainment. They even bought him a new laptop and a mini fridge for his room. When he dropped out after 2 years to find himself and explore his creative side, they didn't even seem upset. They just said that college wasn't for everyone and that Lucas was too artistic for traditional education. They enrolled him at Central Washington the following semester and paid for that too. Different major this time, something about digital media that sounded impressive, but didn't seem to involve much actual work. He dropped out of that one after 18 months when he decided he wanted to be a photographer instead. Again, no consequences. No disappointment. Just understanding and support for his journey of self-discovery. By the time I moved to Seattle and started my career, the pattern was set in stone. I was the responsible one. The one who figured things out on her own. The one who didn't need help or support or even acknowledgement. Lucas was the one who needed protecting, nurturing, endless second chances and financial support. I built my life from scratch in Seattle. Found a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill that I shared with 2 roommates, both of whom were also recent graduates, trying to make it an expensive city. My bedroom was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, but it was mine and I was paying for it myself. I ate ramen more nights than I care to admit, shopped at thrift stores, and walked everywhere to save money on bus fare. Every promotion, every raise, every small step forward in my career, I earned it myself through long hours, continuing education, and proving myself over and over again in a male-dominated field. Meanwhile, Lucas bounced from job to job, like a pinball never lasting more than 6 months anywhere. Retail at the mall where he got fired for showing up late too many times. Food service at a local restaurant where he quit because the manager was too demanding. Or a brief stint at a call center that ended when he just stopped showing up because he said the work was soul-crushing. Through it all, he lived in my parents' basement, rent-free, with his meals cooked, his laundry done, and his car insurance paid by Dad. When I asked my parents why they didn't push him to be more independent, Mom said that Lucas was more sensitive than I was and needed more support to thrive. And here's where the story takes a turn that probably sounds familiar to a lot of you listening. Once I started making decent money, and by decent I mean enough to afford my own studio apartment and occasionally eat something other than pasta, the requests began. It started small, innocent enough that I didn't see the pattern forming. Mom would call and say Lucas's car needed repairs, and could I help out just $200? Nothing major, but Lucas didn't have the money, and my parents were tight on cash that month. Of course, I said yes. That's what family does, right? You help each other out when someone's in a bind. Then Dad would mention that Lucas was a little short on rent for the apartment he'd finally moved into. Could I cover it this month? He'd pay me back as soon as he got his next paycheck. It was only $400 and I was doing so well financially. Again, I said yes. I was proud that Lucas was finally living independently, and if I could help him stay in his own place, that seemed like a good investment in his future. But the requests kept coming, and they kept getting bigger. They needed help with Lucas's business venture, a food truck that he was going to start with a friend. It was going to revolutionize street food in Spokane, and they just needed a small loan to get started. $3,000. I'd get it back as soon as the business took off. The food truck never happened. The friend disappeared with the money, and Lucas decided that the food service industry was too stressful anyway. Then, they wanted me to co-sign for Lucas's car loan. His credit wasn't great, but mine was excellent, and they really needed me to help him get reliable transportation so he could keep his latest job. The car payments would only be $250 a month, and Lucas would handle all of it himself. I said no to that one. Co-signing for a loan felt too risky, too permanent. But the pressure was intense. Multiple phone calls, guilt trips about how I was the only one who could help, reminders of how much the family had sacrificed to support my education. Eventually, I compromised and just gave them the down payment for the car. $2,500. It seemed easier than arguing about it for weeks. Could I pay for Lucas to take a coding boot camp? He'd discovered a passion for web development, and this program would give him the skills he needed to build a real career. It was only $8,000, and he'd definitely pay me back once he started making programmer money. I said yes, even though $8,000 was more than I'd ever spent on anything except my car. Lucas completed 2 weeks of the boot camp before deciding that coding wasn't creative enough for his personality. A weekend trip to Las Vegas for Lucas's birthday that somehow cost me $1,500. Help with a security deposit for a better apartment when his roommate situation fell through. Money for Lucas to buy photography equipment for his newest business idea, a wedding photography service that lasted exactly 3 weeks before he decided that dealing with brides was too stressful. Each request came with detailed explanations of why this was different, why this would be the thing that finally got Lucas on his feet, why this was an investment in his future rather than just another handout. And each time I said yes because I wanted to believe that maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time Lucas would follow through. Maybe this time the money would actually help him build something stable and sustainable. But more than that, I said yes because I was trained to say yes. Because I'd been raised to believe that being financially successful meant I had an obligation to support family members who were struggling. Because saying no felt selfish and cruel. The worst part was how the dynamic affected my relationship with my parents. Every time I helped Lucas financially, they praised me for being such a good sister, such a responsible daughter. But when I hesitated or asked questions about how the money would be used suddenly, I was being judgmental and materialistic. "Money has really changed you, Natalie," my mom said after I questioned whether Lucas really needed a professional-grade camera for his photography business. "You used to care more about family than about your bank account." The implication was clear. My success had made me selfish, and the only way to prove I still cared about family was to keep writing checks. But last spring, the pattern stopped being just annoying and became illegal. Because that's when my parents decided that asking for my help wasn't enough anymore. They decided that my consent was optional, that my financial independence was really just a family resource they could access whenever they wanted. That's when they decided to just take what they wanted, whether I agreed to it or not. And they justified it by telling themselves that I owed it to them, that I owed it to Lucas, that family obligations trumped silly things, like consent and legal boundaries. They convinced themselves that forging my signature wasn't fraud. It was just cutting through red tape to access money that should rightfully be available to help Lucas anyway. After all, what was I going to do about it? I was family. Family doesn't send family to jail over money, right? They had no idea how wrong they were about that. So there I was, standing in my kitchen at 7 in the morning, staring at mortgage documents for a house I'd never bought with my signature on papers I'd never signed, feeling like I'd woken up in someone else's nightmare. My first thought was identity theft. Someone had stolen my information and was using it to buy property. It happens all the time, right? Criminals get your social security number, your employment information, your credit history, and suddenly you're on the hook for debts you never incurred. I immediately called Wells Fargo, but of course I got shuffled through their phone tree for 20 minutes, listening to hold music and recorded messages about how important my call was to them before reaching a voicemail box that was conveniently full. I tried calling back 3 more times, each time getting a different department that couldn't help me and needed to transfer me to someone else who was either in a meeting or away from their desk. By the time I finally reached a human being who could access my account, I was already an hour late for work and my stress level was through the roof. "Ms. Harper, I see here that you have a mortgage with us for a property in Bellevue. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem is that I never applied for this mortgage. I don't own that property. I've never even been inside that house except for one family dinner." There was a pause while she clicked through screens. "Ma'am, I'm showing extensive documentation for this loan, employment verification from your company bank statements, tax returns, credit authorization. Are you saying you didn't provide any of this information?" "I'm saying I've never seen any of these documents before yesterday." Another pause, longer this time. "I also see here that you were present for the property inspection. The inspector's report shows that the borrower, that's you, walked through the property and signed off on the condition." My blood ran cold. I was never at any property inspection. "Ma'am, are you saying that someone else attended this inspection using your identity?" "I'm saying I don't know what happened, but it wasn't me." She put me on hold for 15 minutes while she researched the situation. When she came back, her tone had shifted from helpful to skeptical. "Ms. Harper, I need you to understand that what you're describing would constitute mortgage fraud, which is a federal crime. We're going to need to escalate this to our fraud department, and they'll likely want to involve law enforcement. Are you prepared for that level of investigation? Yes, I said, even though I had no idea what that meant. I want this investigated. I want this mortgage removed from my name. I'm going to transfer you to our fraud department. Please hold. More hold music, more recorded messages. Another 20-minute wait. By the time I finally spoke to someone in the fraud department, it was almost noon, and I'd burned through most of my sick day just trying to get someone to take my situation seriously. The fraud specialist was more thorough, but also more intimidating. She asked detailed questions about who had access to my personal information, whether I'd ever given anyone permission to act on my behalf financially, whether I was currently involved in any family disputes that might explain why someone would want to damage my credit. That last question hit me like a punch to the stomach, because suddenly I knew exactly who had access to my personal information, but deep down something was nagging at me anyway. That address in Bellevue. I knew I'd seen it before, and not just on junk mail or random real estate listings. Then it hit me like a freight train. 3 months earlier, my mom had called and asked if I wanted to come to dinner at Lucas's new place. She said he was house-sitting for a friend and wanted to cook for the family. It seemed weird because Lucas had never cooked anything more complicated than ramen, and even that usually ended up burned or undercooked. But I figured maybe he was finally growing up and learning some life skills. The address on those mortgage papers was exactly where we'd had that dinner. I spent that entire night awake, pacing around my apartment like a caged animal, Googling everything I could about mortgage fraud and identity theft. I checked my credit report about 15 times looking for other accounts or loans I didn't recognize. I called the fraud departments of all 3 credit bureaus and put alerts on my accounts. But the more I thought about it, the more details from that dinner came flooding back, and they all felt sinister now. My parents had insisted on giving me a complete tour of the house. They'd pointed out the nice kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. They'd shown me the spacious bedrooms, the master suite with the walk-in closet, the 2-car garage with plenty of storage space. They'd asked me what I thought about the neighborhood, about the house prices in Bellevue, about whether I thought buying property on the east side would be a good investment for someone my age. At the time, I'd thought they were just making conversation, maybe even hinting that I should consider buying my own place instead of renting. Now I realized they'd been gathering intelligence for their fraud scheme. They'd asked me about my job, my salary, my credit score, questions that seemed like normal parental interest in my success, but now felt like reconnaissance missions. You must be making good money now, working on all those big construction projects, my dad had said over dinner. Do you think you'll stay at your current company long term? My mom had asked. They seem to really value you. Lori, have you ever thought about buying a house? Lucas had chimed in. With your credit and income, you could probably get a great rate. I'd answered all their questions because they were my family, and talking about my career success felt like one of the few topics that generated positive attention from them. I told them about my salary, my job security, my excellent credit score that I'd worked so hard to build. I even mentioned that I'd been pre-approved for a mortgage up to $600,000 when I'd casually looked into buying my own place the year before. Now I realized that every piece of information I'd shared had been used against me. The next morning, my phone rang at exactly 8:30 a.m. It was my mom, and her voice had that artificially cheerful tone she used when she was about to ask for something. Hi, honey, did you get the papers? I almost dropped the phone. My heart started racing immediately. What papers, Mom? The mortgage papers. From Wells Fargo. We need to talk. The casual way she said it, like she was asking if I'd gotten a birthday card or a magazine subscription, made my stomach turn. Mom, what did you do? Come over for dinner tonight. We'll explain everything. Don't worry, it's all going to work out fine. Mom, did you forge my signature on mortgage documents? Natalie, don't be so dramatic. Just come to dinner. We'll talk about it then. She hung up before I could respond. I should have said no. I should have hung up and called the police right then, but I guess some part of me was still hoping there was some reasonable explanation for all this. Maybe they'd co-signed something and my name got added by mistake. Maybe there was some paperwork mix-up that could be easily resolved. I knew I was grasping at straws, but the alternative that my own parents had committed felony fraud using my identity was too horrible to fully accept. I called in sick to work again and spent the day in a fog of anxiety and disbelief. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I couldn't eat. I kept looking at those mortgage documents trying to make sense of how this had happened. The signature looked exactly like mine. Not similar, not close exactly like it. Someone had practiced copying my handwriting, or they'd traced it from other documents, or they'd found some other way to perfectly replicate the way I write my name. I drove to my parents' house that evening with the mortgage documents in my purse, and my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The whole 20-minute drive, I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to handle this conversation. But when I walked in, I realized I was completely unprepared for what I found. The whole family was there. Mom, Dad, and Lucas all sitting around the dining room table like they were waiting for me. There was no dinner cooking, no plate set, no pretense that this was a normal family gathering. Lucas was smiling, actually smiling, like he was excited about something. That should have been my first clue that something was very, very wrong. The dining room felt different too. Formal, staged, like they'd arranged themselves for maximum impact. My dad was at the head of the table looking serious and authoritative. My mom was to his right with a stack of papers in front of her. Lucas was across from her, still smiling that weird, anticipatory smile. There was an empty chair facing all of them, clearly meant for me. I sat down slowly, feeling like I was walking into an ambush. My dad gestured for me to sit down, and my mom immediately went into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. Her voice was steady, confident like she'd practiced this multiple times. Natalie, we found a home for Lucas. It's a beautiful place in Bellevue, great neighborhood, good investment potential. You're going to pay the mortgage. We've already signed it for you. I just stared at them. I couldn't process what I was hearing. The casual way she said it, like she was telling me they'd picked up my dry cleaning or watered my plants while I was out of town. You signed what for me? The mortgage application, the paperwork, all the documents the bank needed. Don't worry, we know your signature pretty well after all these years. We've been signing birthday cards and Christmas gifts with your name since you were little. That's when it hit me. They had forged my signature. On a $500,000 mortgage. Multiple documents, multiple signatures, an entire loan application filled out in my name without my knowledge or consent. And they were sitting there, talking about it, like they'd ordered me a pizza. Are you insane? I stood up so fast my chair fell over backward, making a loud crash that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. This isn't just disrespect, it's felony-level fraud. My dad actually rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic about a minor inconvenience. It's not fraud, Natalie. It's family responsibility. You make good money, you have excellent credit, and Lucas needs a stable place to live. This is what families do for each other. Lucas finally spoke up, and his tone was defensive and bitter. You always act like money makes you better than us. Like you're so much more successful and responsible than the rest of us. Well, now you can actually help your family instead of just judging us and making us feel like failures. I looked around that table at these people who were supposed to love me, and I realized I was looking at strangers. Strangers who had just committed a federal crime using my name and were expecting me to go along with it like it was a reasonable family arrangement. You forged my signature on a mortgage. Do you understand that's a federal crime? Do you understand they can send you to prison for this? My mom waved her hand like I was being theatrical about a minor misunderstanding. Oh, Natalie, stop being so dramatic. We're family. It's not like we're strangers who stole your identity. We just cut through some red tape to help Lucas get into a nice house. You should be happy that we found such a good investment property. Investment property? I don't want an investment property. I never agreed to buy a house, especially not for someone else to live in. Well, it's done now, my dad said matter-of-factly. The closing was last week. Lucas has already moved in. The first mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks, and we expect you to handle that. Expect me to handle it, I was yelling now, which I never do. I pride myself on staying calm and rational, but this situation had blown past every boundary of reasonable behavior. That's exactly what I expect, my dad said, raising his voice to match mine. You've been successful because this family supported you. We sacrificed to help you get through college. We've been patient while you built your career. Now it's time for you to give back. I've been giving back. I've been giving you money for years. Every time Lucas needed something, every time there was some crisis or business venture or emergency, I wrote a check. And that was nice. My mom said, but this is different. This is permanent support. This is making sure Lucas has housing security so he can focus on building his life without worrying about rent. By making me responsible for his mortgage without asking me, "We're asking you now?" Lucas said, and his smile had turned into something ugly. "We're giving you the chance to step up and actually help your family for once." For once, I've given you thousands of dollars over the past few years. Pocket change, Lucas sneered. You make more in a month than I make in 6 months. You can afford this mortgage payment and I can't. So why shouldn't you pay it? The logic was so twisted, so entitled that I couldn't even formulate a response. They had literally stolen my identity to commit mortgage fraud, and they were treating me like the unreasonable one for objecting to it. Here's what's going to happen, I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though I was shaking with rage. I'm going to contact the police and the bank. I'm going to report this fraud, and I'm going to make sure this mortgage gets removed from my name. The room went dead silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the sound of a neighbor's dog barking outside. Lucas stopped smiling. My dad's face turned red, and my mom got that look I remembered from childhood, the look that meant I was about to be punished for being difficult. You wouldn't dare, my mom said, but her voice wavered slightly. Watch me. Natalie, think about what you're saying, my dad said, leaning forward across the table. You're talking about sending your own parents to jail. Over money. Is that really the kind of person you want to be? I'm talking about protecting myself from people who committed felony fraud using my identity. The fact that those people happen to be related to me doesn't make it legal. Lucas slammed his hand on the table so hard that my mom's stack of papers jumped. You're being ridiculous. It's just a mortgage. You can afford it. Why are you making this such a big deal? Because it's not just a mortgage, Lucas. It's $500,000 in debt that I never agreed to take on. It's my credit, my financial future, my legal liability. If you default on those payments, if you decide you don't want to live there anymore, if you damage the property, I'm the one who's responsible. I'm the one the bank will come after. I'm not going to default, Lucas said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Based on what your stellar employment history, your track record of following through on financial commitments, you've never held a job for more than 6 months, Lucas. You've never paid rent on time. You've never owned anything more valuable than a video game console. And now you want me to trust you with a $500,000 mortgage. That's different, my mom interjected. This is his home now. He'll be more responsible when he has real stakes. Then let him get his own mortgage. Let him build his own credit. Let him take responsibility for his own housing situation. He can't qualify for a mortgage on his own, my dad admitted. Then maybe he can't afford to own a house. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. I'd said the thing that everyone knew but nobody wanted to acknowledge. Lucas couldn't afford this house. He couldn't qualify for this mortgage. He couldn't handle this level of financial responsibility. So they'd decided to make it on my problem instead. You know what the real issue is here? My mom said, her voice taking on that martyred tone she used when she wanted to make me feel guilty. You've become selfish, Natalie. Success has made you selfish. You used to care about family. You used to understand that we all need to help each other. I do care about family. I've proven that by giving you money every time you asked for it. But this isn't asking for help. This is stealing my identity and committing fraud. We didn't steal anything, my dad said. We used your name to help your brother. That's what families do. No, Dad, that's what criminals do. Families ask for permission. Families respect boundaries. Families don't forge signatures on legal documents. Legal documents, Lucas mocked. Everything's so legal and official with you. Can't you just be a human being for once instead of acting like some kind of corporate robot? Being a human being doesn't mean letting people commit crimes against me, even if they're family. Crime, my mom scoffed. You're being so dramatic. It's paperwork, Natalie. It's just paperwork to help your brother get housing. It's not just paperwork, Mom. It's a legally binding contract that makes me responsible for over $500,000 in debt. If Lucas stops making payments, the bank comes after me. If Lucas damages the property, I'm liable. If Lucas decides to sell the house, I have to agree to it, because my name is on the deed. This affects every aspect of my financial life for the next 30 years. Well, maybe it's time you started thinking about the family's financial life instead of just your own, my dad said. That's when I realized something that chilled me to the bone. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. They genuinely believed that my financial success created an obligation for me to support Lucas, and that my consent was optional as long as the cause was family-related. In their minds, I was being selfish and unreasonable. They were just doing what families do, pooling resources to help the person who needed it most. The fact that they'd committed multiple felonies to make this happen was irrelevant to them. The fact that they'd violated my trust, stolen my identity, and put my financial future at risk didn't matter because their intentions were good. Let me ask you something, I said, trying one last time to make them understand. If Lucas had come to me and asked me to co-sign for this mortgage, what do you think I would have said? You would have said no, my mom admitted. And why do you think I would have said no? Because you're selfish, Lucas muttered. No, because I can't afford to take on this kind of debt. Because I don't think Lucas is ready for this level of responsibility. Because I don't want to be tied to a mortgage for a house I don't live in and can't control. But now, you don't have a choice, my dad said with a satisfied smile. It's done. The papers are signed. The closing happened. Lucas has moved in. You can either make the mortgage payments or you can let your credit get destroyed and face legal consequences for defaulting on a loan. And that's when I understood their strategy completely. They hadn't just forged my signature out of desperation or lack of options. They deliberately trapped me in a situation where going along with their plan seemed like the easier choice than fighting them. They thought that once the deed was done, I'd have no choice but to go along with it. They thought I'd be too scared of the consequences, too worried about family relationships, too conflict-averse to fight back. They'd calculated that I would choose to pay the mortgage rather than deal with the hassle and emotional cost of reporting them for fraud. They had underestimated me completely. You're right, I said, standing up and picking up my purse. I don't have a choice, but my choice isn't between paying the mortgage and letting my credit get destroyed. My choice is between enabling your criminal behavior and protecting myself from it. What's that supposed to mean? Lucas asked. It means I'm going to treat this exactly like what it is. Identity theft committed by strangers. I'm going to file police reports, work with the bank's fraud department, and do whatever it takes to get this mortgage removed from my name. You can't do that, my mom said, but she sounded less confident now. I can, and I will. We'll fight you, my dad threatened. We'll tell everyone what you're doing. We'll make sure the whole family knows that you tried to send us to jail over money. Go ahead. Tell them the truth. Tell them that you forged my signature on a $500,000 mortgage without my knowledge or consent. Tell them that you committed multiple felonies and then expected me to go along with it. See how much sympathy you get. I walked toward the front door, and my mom followed me. Natalie, wait, can't we work something out? Maybe you could just help with part of the mortgage payment? We don't expect you to pay the whole thing. I turned around and looked at her. This woman who had raised me, who had taught me right from wrong, who had always insisted that honesty was the most important value our family shared. Mom, you forged my signature, multiple times, on legal documents. That's a felony. There's no compromise position on felony fraud. But we're family, she said, and for the first time her voice broke a little. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't do this to each other. I reached for the door handle, and that's when my mother said the words that changed everything between us forever. If you walk out that door, you're not part of this family anymore. The room was dead silent. Lucas was nodding along like she'd just said something reasonable. My dad was staring at his hands, probably already thinking about damage control. I looked at each of them one more time. These people who had shaped my childhood, who knew all my secrets and fears and dreams. These people who I'd thought would always have my back no matter what. These people who had just committed felony fraud against me and were now threatening to disown me for refusing to go along with it. I picked up my purse, looked at each of them one more time, and walked to the front door. Then I guess I'm not part of this family anymore. I drove home that night, knowing my life had just changed forever. I'd lost my family, but I'd gained something too, the knowledge that I was strong enough to protect myself. Even when the people hurting me were the ones who were supposed to love me most. But I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The first person I called was my best friend Olivia. We'd met in college and stayed close even after she went to law school, and I went into engineering. She was a junior partner at a mid-sized firm downtown, and if anyone could help me figure out what to do, it was her. I showed up at her apartment at 9 o'clock that night, still shaking from the confrontation with my family. When she opened the door and saw my face, she immediately pulled me inside and made me tea while I explained what had happened. Natalie, she said when I finished, this is serious. Like federal crime, serious. Your parents didn't just cross a line, they obliterated it. She made some calls the next morning and connected me with Rachel Stern, an attorney who specialized in financial crimes and family disputes. Rachel was no nonsense, direct, and exactly what I needed. Our first meeting was a reality check. Rachel explained that while what my parents did was absolutely illegal, proving it and undoing it would be complicated and expensive, but she also made it clear that I had to act fast. Every day you wait makes it look like you're accepting responsibility for this debt, she told me. We need to move now. We started with a certified letter to Wells Fargo formally rejecting any responsibility for the mortgage and demanding an investigation into the fraud. We contacted the County Property Records Office. We filed reports with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the local police. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought my parents would realize they'd gone too far and work with me to fix this mess. I was wrong. The retaliation started immediately. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my parents, dozens of voicemails, most of them from my mom, alternating between sobbing about how I was destroying the family and screaming about how ungrateful and selfish I was. Then my mom showed up at my office. I was in a meeting with clients when my assistant knocked on the conference room door and said there was a woman in the lobby claiming to be my mother and demanding to see me. I excused myself and found my mom in the reception area crying loudly and telling anyone who would listen that her daughter was trying to put her in jail over a simple family misunderstanding. Security had to escort her out while she yelled about how I'd forgotten where I came from. But the worst part was what Lucas did. Within a week of our confrontation, Lucas had created a GoFundMe page with a story about how his heartless sister was trying to make him homeless. He posted screenshots of text messages, but they were clearly edited to make me look like I was refusing to help him out of pure spite. Then, he made TikTok videos, crying, talking about how he'd always looked up to his big sister, and now she was abandoning him when he needed her most. He never mentioned the mortgage fraud, obviously. In his version, I was just being cruel for no reason. The comments on those videos were brutal. Thousands of people calling me heartless, selfish, a terrible sister. Some people even tracked down my social media accounts and sent me direct messages telling me what an awful person I was. But the thing that really broke me was when the extended family got involved. My aunt called me crying, asking how I could do this to Lucas. My cousins sent me long texts about how disappointed they were in me. My grandmother, who I'd always been close to, left me a voicemail saying she never thought she'd raise someone who could be so heartless to her own family. Nobody wanted to hear about the fraud. Nobody cared that my parents had forged my signature on a $500,000 debt. All they saw was Lucas's version of the story where I was the villain who was abandoning my family over money. The stress started eating me alive. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake all night staring at the ceiling thinking about everything that was happening. I lost 15 pounds in a month because I couldn't keep food down. My hands would shake during meetings at work. I started having panic attacks. The first one hit me in the grocery store when I thought I saw my dad in the produce section. I had to abandon my cart and sit in my car for 20 minutes trying to breathe. I finally went to see a therapist, thinking maybe she could help me cope with the stress. But after I explained the situation, she suggested that maybe I should consider compromising with my family. Family relationships are so important, she said. Maybe there's a way to work this out that doesn't involve legal action. Have you considered just taking over the mortgage payments? It might be easier than fighting this. I walked out of her office and never went back. Because what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that this wasn't about money. This was about my parents deciding that my consent didn't matter, that my financial security didn't matter, that I existed to solve their problems whether I agreed to it or not. I thought things couldn't get worse. I thought we'd hit rock bottom. Then one morning, I opened my door to grab the newspaper, and there it was. A thick envelope with a return address from a law firm I'd never heard of. I opened it right there on my doorstep, still in my pajamas. It was a lawsuit. From my parents. They were suing me for $520,000, claiming I had verbally agreed to take responsibility for Lucas's mortgage and was now trying to back out of my family obligations. They were actually suing me for a debt they had created by forging my signature. I sat down on my front steps and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the situation had become so insane that laughter was the only response that made sense. That's when I realized this wasn't going to end quietly. My parents weren't going to come to their senses. They were going to fight me every step of the way. And if they wanted a fight, I was going to give them one. Harper versus Harper. That's what the court filing said. My own parents were taking me to court, claiming I owed them $520,000 based on a verbal family agreement that never existed. Rachel took one look at the lawsuit and shook her head. This is either incredibly stupid or incredibly desperate. Maybe both. But she also explained that we needed to take this seriously. Even a frivolous lawsuit could drag on for months and cost tens of thousands of dollars to defend. We're going to need backup, she said. I know someone who specializes in exactly this type of case. That's how I met Marcus Bennett. He was a heavyweight attorney who'd built his career handling complex family financial disputes. He'd seen cases like mine before, and he had no patience for family members who used emotional manipulation to cover up financial crimes. Here's what we're going to do, Marcus explained during our first meeting. We're not just going to defend against their lawsuit. We're going to file counterclaims for fraud, emotional distress, and harassment. We're going to make this so expensive and painful for them that they'll regret ever starting it. The case was assigned to Judge Ellen Novak, who had a reputation for being stern but fair. She didn't tolerate nonsense in her courtroom, and she especially didn't like people who wasted the court's time with frivolous lawsuits. When the trial date finally arrived, I walked into that courthouse with Marcus and Rachel, and I saw my entire family sitting on the other side of the courtroom. My parents, Lucas, even my aunt and uncle who had driven up from Portland to show support. They all glared at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. My parents' attorney was a guy named Tom Morrison, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd probably taken the case thinking it would be a simple family dispute that would settle quickly. I doubt he realized he'd be defending people who had committed mortgage fraud. The trial started with Morrison trying to paint my parents as loving family members who were just trying to help their struggling son. He talked about family values and mutual support and how sometimes families make informal agreements that don't get written down. Karen and David Harper have supported both of their children throughout their lives, he said during his opening statement. When their son needed help securing housing, they turned to their successful daughter, who had previously agreed to help with family expenses. This isn't fraud, this is family. Then Lucas took the stand. He sat there in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, talking about how hard his life had been and how much he needed his family's support. He claimed that I had agreed to help him buy a house during that dinner in Bellevue, and that I was only backing out now because I was jealous of his success. Success! The guy who hadn't held a job for more than 6 months was talking about his success. My mom testified next, crying about how she'd raised me to care about family, and how disappointed she was that I was putting money before blood. She swore that I had verbally agreed to take responsibility for Lucas's mortgage. The whole performance was impressive, I'll give them that. If you didn't know the facts, you might actually feel sorry for them. But then it was our turn. Marcus started by calling me to the stand. I was terrified, but I also felt something I hadn't felt in months: relief. Finally, someone was going to hear my side of the story. Ms. Harper, Marcus said, "Did you ever agree to be responsible for your brother's mortgage?" "No, I did not." "Did you sign any mortgage documents for the property in Bellevue?" "No, I did not." "Did you even know that your parents were applying for a mortgage in your name?" "I had no idea until I received the paperwork in the mail." I looked directly at the judge as I said the next part. "Your Honor, I built my life from the ground up. I worked multiple jobs to put myself through college. I earned every promotion, saved every dollar, and built my credit score through years of responsible financial management. My parents never asked for my permission to use my name on this mortgage. They never asked for my consent. They just stole my identity and expected me to go along with it." But the real turning point came when Marcus presented the evidence. See, the thing about family members who commit fraud is that they're usually not very good at covering their tracks. They get sloppy because they think family loyalty will protect them. Marcus had subpoenaed my parents' phone records, email accounts, and text messages, and what he found was a goldmine. There were text messages between my parents from weeks before that dinner in Bellevue, discussing how they were going to get me to take responsibility for Lucas's mortgage. There was an email from my dad to my mom saying, "Once it's signed, what can she really do about it?" Most damning of all was a voicemail my mom had left for my aunt, thinking she was leaving it for my dad. In it, she said, "We just need to get through the closing, and then Natalie will have to deal with it. She's not going to let Lucas become homeless." Judge Novak's eyes narrowed as each piece of evidence was presented. You could see her getting more and more annoyed as the full scope of my parents' deception became clear. When Marcus finished presenting our case, the judge called for a brief recess, but you could tell she'd already made up her mind. When court resumed, Judge Novak didn't waste any time. "I've been on this bench for 15 years, she said, "and I have never seen a more clear-cut case of mortgage fraud presented as a family dispute. The evidence shows that the defendants engaged in deliberate deception, forgery, and identity theft. They then compounded their crimes by filing a frivolous lawsuit against their victim." She looked directly at my parents. "This court finds that the plaintiffs have no basis whatsoever for their claims against the defendant. Furthermore, this lawsuit appears to be nothing more than an attempt to harass and intimidate Ms. Harper into accepting responsibility for debts she never incurred." Then came the part I'll never forget. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with prejudice. The defendants are ordered to pay $18,000 in sanctions to cover Ms. Harper's legal fees. Additionally, I am issuing a 90-day restraining order, preventing any of the plaintiffs from contacting Ms. Harper directly or indirectly. She paused and looked at my parents one more time. "Finally, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution." The courtroom was dead silent. My mom started crying, but not the manipulative crying she'd done during her testimony. This was the crying of someone who just realized the consequences of her actions. My dad sat there staring at his hands, probably calculating how much this was going to cost them in criminal defense attorneys. And Lucas looked like he'd just figured out that his free ride was over. As for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I didn't win money. I won something bigger. I won my autonomy. I won the right to live my life without being treated like an ATM by people who were supposed to love me. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their dysfunction. Sometimes you have to choose your own well-being over keeping the peace. And sometimes you have to accept that the people who claim to love you might not actually have your best interests at heart. The story didn't end when I walked out of that courtroom. Within a week, local news stations had picked up the story. Family mortgage fraud case exposes dangers of financial abuse was the headline in the Seattle Times. A few reporters called asking for interviews, but I declined them all. I'd said everything I needed to say in court. My parents, on the other hand, tried to do damage control. My mom gave an interview to a local TV station, still claiming this was all a misunderstanding and that I was tearing the family apart over money. But by then, the court records were public and people could see the evidence for themselves. Olivia came over the night the story aired on the evening news. We sat on my couch eating takeout Chinese food and watching my mother on TV still playing the victim. "You know what I'm proud of," Olivia said, turning off the TV. "They tried to bankrupt you into silence. They tried to destroy your credit, your reputation, your peace of mind. They threw everything they had at you and you stayed standing." She was right. 6 months earlier, I would have given in. I would have found a way to rationalize their behavior and taken on the debt just to keep the peace. But somewhere along the way, I'd learned that peace bought with your own dignity isn't really peace at all. A few weeks later, I got an email that surprised me. It was from my Uncle Michael, my dad's older brother, who I hadn't spoken to in years. "Natalie," it said, "I saw the news story about what happened with your parents. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up to them. They tried to pull something similar with me back in 1998, involving a business loan for Lucas's father's restaurant venture. I was younger and didn't have the courage to fight back like you did. I ended up paying $30,000 that I couldn't afford, and it nearly ruined my marriage. You stopped the cycle. Thank you for being braver than I was." That email made me realize something important. This pattern of financial manipulation had been going on in my family for decades. I wasn't the first victim, but maybe I could be the last. About 2 months after the trial, I got a text message from Lucas. It was the first contact I'd had with any of my family since the restraining order expired. "Hey, Natalie, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that I'm seeing a therapist. I'm starting to understand how messed up our family dynamics were. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am sorry." I stared at that message for a long time before responding. "I'm glad you're getting help, Lucas. That takes courage. I'm not ready to reconnect right now, but I hope therapy helps you build a better life for yourself." It was polite, it was honest, and it was enough. He texted back asking if we could meet for coffee sometime, maybe talk things through. I didn't respond to that one. I wasn't ready, and I might never be ready. And that's okay too. Some people think forgiveness means you have to restore the relationship, but I've learned that you can forgive someone and still choose not to have them in your life. You can wish someone well from a distance. My therapist, the new one I found after firing the first one, helped me understand that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes healing looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like walking away. 6 months after the trial, I was finally sleeping through the night again. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost from stress. I could check my mail without my heart racing. I could answer my phone without fear. I also learned something else important. When you stop enabling dysfunctional behavior, some people will call you selfish. They'll say you're being harsh, unforgiving, cold. They'll tell you that family should come first, no matter what. But here's what I know now. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. Setting boundaries isn't mean, and refusing to be financially abused by your own family isn't heartless. It's survival. This wasn't about money, it was about self-respect. It was about refusing to let people who claim to love me treat me like their personal ATM. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Because when you enable someone's destructive behavior, you're not helping them. You're just teaching them that their actions don't have consequences. I still live in Seattle. I still work as a structural engineer. I'm still close with Olivia, who stood by me through the worst period of my life. I've built a chosen family of friends who respect my boundaries and value my well-being. And every month, when I pay my own bills for my own apartment that I chose to live in, I remember what it feels like to have control over my own financial future. I don't know if my parents ever faced criminal charges. I don't know if Lucas ever got his life together. I don't know if they tell people I'm the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family. And honestly, I don't care. Because I learned that you can't control other people's behavior, but you can control how you respond to it. You can't make people respect your boundaries, but you can enforce them anyway. And you can't change the past, but you can protect your future. To anyone listening who might be dealing with family financial abuse, let me tell you this. It's not normal for family members to forge your signature. It's not your responsibility to sacrifice your financial security for someone else's comfort. And it's not selfish to protect yourself from people who are hurting you, even if they're related to you. You don't owe anyone access to your bank account, your credit score, or your peace of mind. Not even family. Especially not family. Sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to love yourself enough to say no. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for more real stories about family drama legal battles and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below.